Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NCSL's virtual meeting series. My name is Michelle Ekstrom, and I'm the director of the education program at NCSL. And this week we will be focusing on the topic of teachers. We know that the pandemic has particularly impacted the recruitment, preparation of teachers, and also how we think about supporting teachers right now. What kind of professional development do they need, and how do we think about the supports that they need going forward this fall? Today, we will focus on the topic of teacher recruitment and preparation. So thank you for joining us. Just a few words about protocol as we get started. During today's virtual meeting, we would ask you to please be sure to join us by video so that you have access to the full opportunity and you can see the slides that our speakers are presenting. And also we would ask that you click on the three dots in your tile and be sure to display your full name and either your state or your organization so that we know who is joining us. We would also ask you to please mute yourself so that we can hear the speakers and there's not background noise. There might be times when we ask you to unmute yourself and participate by asking questions, but otherwise please keep yourselves muted. There will be opportunity, as I mentioned, to pose questions. So please go ahead and do so by typing your questions in the chat box. And also be sure to raise your hand if you would like to be recognized as well. We would ask that you please not share your screen under any circumstances. And also just a reminder that this meeting is recorded. It will be archived and the slides will be made publicly available. You can find that either on NCSL's YouTube channel or on our website at the link that's mentioned below. So just an overview of today's agenda. We are happy, as I mentioned, to be focused on teachers this week. This is a really important element of the discussion right now. And we are pleased to have with us speakers from the Learning Policy Institute who will be speaking first. And then we will have time for questions, but please feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat box while Tara and Ryan are speaking. And then we will have Wyatt Gordon from ETS also joining us, and also please feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will get to those as well. And then at the end, I will give you a teaser and a preview of our upcoming meetings. So let's begin today by having some chatter in the chat box. So first of all, I wanted to draw reference to this picture that we have here, teaching, the profession that creates all other professions. And I think this is really important to remember right now, that education is really how we think of building our workforce. And it is so important right now that we really think through how the pandemic is affecting education, but in particular, how it's affecting the teaching profession. And I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to focus on this particular aspect. So just a reminder of the importance of it. So in the chat box, I'd love for you to write your name and your state or your organization, and what is your #1 concern for recruitment and retention in the pandemic. So we'll give you just a few seconds to do that. Okay, I can see we have a few folks writing right now. So while you're doing that, I am going to go ahead and introduce all three of today's speakers. So with us today, we have Tara Kini, who serves as the Chief of Staff and Director of State Policy for the Learning Policy Institute. You may know the Learning Policy Institute is a close partner to NCSL. Their focus is to really connect research and policy, do original research themselves and connect both the research they do and the other important research that's out there to the policymakers who will be making decisions. And we have partnered with LPI for a good long time on a variety of topics, particularly on the topic of teaching. And then with us, we also have Ryan Saunders, who also works at the Learning Policy Institute. And he is a policy advisor who works on several teams, one of which is the Educator Quality Team. You may also know Ryan from his time at the Council of Chief State School Officers, where he also worked on an important initiative in this area as well. And we partnered in that effort too. And then we also have joining us Wyatt Gordon from ETS, and he is the Executive Director of Professional Educator Programs in the Student and Teacher Assessment Division. And Wyatt will be discussing with us the work that ETS is doing, particularly around Praxis and those opportunities that we have to think about the licensure exams and how they've had to pivot quickly to ensure that teachers who are already in teacher preparation programs and graduating have the opportunity to pass those licensure exams and get into the classroom. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Tara and Ryan to join us for our discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Can you hear me? Excellent. We're really honored to be joining this conversation today with you all. We so appreciate our partnership with NCSL and your members and the ability to join these very real-time conversations that you all are hosting. It's such a service to the field right now. On this topic around the impact of COVID on the teacher workforce, we have been tracking state responses in the area of educator preparation. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that with you today and then pass it over to Ryan, who will share a bit about what we're seeing in terms of practice in the field amongst educator preparation programs and districts as well. Before I jump into what we're seeing states doing, I do want to take a minute to ground the conversation and why does this matter? We are talking right now about the next generation of teachers who will be teaching our children, as Michelle said, and that's about 600,000 candidates who are enrolled in teacher preparation programs this year. We also know that certification and experience matter for student achievement. We've seen that borne out in large-scale studies from states across the country, including New York, North Carolina, and California. Research also indicates that teachers without full preparation leave at 2 to 3 times the rates of fully prepared teachers, creating that leaky bucket phenomenon that we unfortunately know so well, and that contributes to shortages and really undermines school improvement efforts. We also know that these characteristics of teachers are inequitably distributed. That's unfortunately a pattern we've seen borne out over decades of research and experience. This slide here shows the most recent civil rights data collection data. As you can see, the percentage of uncertified teachers grew overall from 2014 to 2016, and students of color were impacted more by this increase in uncertified teachers. Schools with a high student of color enrollment had 4 times more uncertified teachers than schools with a low student of color enrollment. So the policy decisions that states are making and have recently made about expectations and supports for teacher preparation will have major implications for equity, both in terms of the quality of teachers that students have access to, but also in terms of the candidates themselves who have invested their time and financial resources into getting a license with the expectation that they would get one at the end of this school year. So while the mission of ensuring that candidates receive high quality preparation and are ready to teach hasn't changed, the context in which we're preparing those teachers has dramatically changed as a result of COVID. So what are we seeing in terms of state responses? I do want to say we have not done a 50-state scan at LPI. Others have done so, and I'd point you to the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education has a really great interactive map on their website that I would recommend, and we'll provide the link at the end of this slide deck and get it out to you. But based on our review of state policies and other resources, we're seeing three major types of responses from states. The first is providing flexibility and discretion to educator preparation programs around the number of required days of student teaching or clinical practice, as well as how those practice hours can be met. The second is providing temporary waivers or other emergency style certificates to allow candidates to teach next year while they finish completing their requirements. And then, of course, the statutory and regulatory changes where they're needed, particularly around testing or performance assessment requirements. So I'll share a little bit about each of these. But before I do, I want to say a quick word about process. I mean, policy is moving at warp speed right now during COVID, and some states have really tried to work closely with their stakeholders to inform policy development in this area. And again, you know, every state is different in terms of its ability to do it and how rapidly they had to act. Illinois took a beat longer to issue its guidance than some other states, but they did so after engaging in a stakeholder kind of listening process, including with higher ed. And as I heard leaders from Illinois describe it, that process lifted up for them considerations that they hadn't first thought about. For example, their state requirement that you had to have a C or better in coursework couldn't happen with you know, the move to pass-fail grades. So they were able to respond to that requirement. I just wanted to lift up some of the processes as well that states have engaged in around that. In terms of the flexibilities that we're seeing states grant, a number of states are providing very broad discretion to their EPPs to determine whether or not candidates have met the requirements for licensure, particularly when it comes to student teaching and clinical practice. States are also broadening what counts for student teaching or clinical practice, as well as the type of evidence to demonstrate whether or not candidates have met the teaching standards in the state. An example of this, California has issued pretty strong guidance on what can count as clinical experiences. That's broadly worded and quite flexible. And I've bolded here some of the ways that candidates and programs can count clinical experience, including online learning, remote instruction, as part of an extended school year, for example, virtual reality or simulation teaching settings, and then looking at videos or other examples of effective teaching that can be viewed, analyzed, and discussed. Some states are also providing guidance directly to LEAs to encourage them to continue to provide these clinical experiences. And Kansas came out early on this, really framing it as what it is, an incredible learning and teaching moment for the newest members of the profession, and encouraging districts to include them as much as possible. A number of states are providing temporary waivers or other emergency style certificates to allow their candidates to teach next year while they finish completing requirements. And importantly, they're doing this with the expectation that candidates finish their requirements and not be left hanging without that full license or full preparation. Mississippi, for example, waived testing requirements, as did Illinois. Indiana waived their CPR requirement. Connecticut has provided an EdTPA waiver request option. A best practice that many states are doing is who are providing waivers is giving really clear direction to districts and educator preparation programs, as well as induction programs, regarding the additional support that will be needed for those candidates next year who haven't yet completed their requirements and are serving on waivers, and being very clear and specific about that. Finally, some states are exploring statutory or regulatory changes where those are needed. I think we're going to hear more as well from Wyatt in a few minutes about the flexibilities that major testing providers are also providing to their candidates. So I've focused mostly on state policies to ensure candidates in the pipeline can earn their license and are ready to be hired. But I think there's a real question out there about whether or not there will be jobs for them. And I think there's so much we don't know here right now. We do know from prior research that about 90% of the demand for new teachers is due to teacher attrition, and the vast majority of this attrition, about 2/3 of it, is from teachers who are leaving the field before retirement. It's pre-retirement attrition. But we don't know, will COVID increase or decrease teacher turnover? People have speculated at both. On the one hand, there's a real fear of COVID and returning to the classroom amongst older and immune-compromised teachers who are the most at risk. On the other hand, teachers need their job security right now in the midst of this recession and everything else that their families may be experiencing. We also don't know if COVID will increase or decrease the demand for new hires. On the one hand, there's going to be a need for more staff to enable social distancing in schools as schools reopen. On the other hand, we are in the midst of major budget cuts and the ensuing layoffs that may result. Again, we just don't know. On the latter question, however, we did an analysis at LPI, and my colleague Michael Griffith is on this call as well, who did the analysis about the potential impact of budget cuts on teacher layoffs. This is a pattern we've seen play out in the Great Recession when we lost 120,000 teacher positions, a number that would have been far higher had the federal government not stepped in with Recovery Act funding back then. Based on our analysis, and I provided the link to the interactive tool on our website, you can see that a 15% reduction in state contributions to education could result in a loss of about 320,000 teaching positions in this country. Again, there's a lot we don't know in terms of how this play out, but there's a lot to be worried about on this front. Where districts are hiring this spring and summer, they're doing so really differently. Because hiring is happening virtually, districts have an advantage who had already shifted to virtual hiring and interview practices. Some districts are using really innovative approaches here that may prove to be best practices in the long run. We're seeing rural districts in particular target similar geographic and demographic regions for hiring and doing so virtually. We are seeing districts around military bases target military spouses for recruitment and able to hire them, again, virtually. We're seeing districts benefit from reduced travel and recruitment costs on the one hand, but needing to invest more in their branding and getting their district out there through virtual networks. Districts are using new platforms to enable a broader review of materials. So, for example, candidates are able to submit videos of their teaching because they can't do in-person simulation or lessons or interviews. And we're seeing districts be able to include a broader range of folks in the interviewing process, even including students or other staff in those virtual interviews. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Ryan Saunders, who will share a bit about how programs themselves are shifting in this new context. So Ryan, I will move your slides, but turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Tara. And as Tara mentioned, I'd like to take a few moments to drill down a bit and highlight how programs are responding to the shifting policy landscape that you all just saw some examples of. And this includes what we are hearing from our network and also including examples from preparation programs that make up the Educator Preparation Laboratory, or EdPrep Lab. The EdPrep Lab is a growing network of teacher and leader preparation programs from across the country, and they're committed to transforming educator preparation through research, practice, and policy. So in considering the state responses we discussed up to this point, I wanted to focus on how programs are responding to the increased flexibility around clinical practice. Specifically, programs are exploring and expanding what counts as clinical hours under the current context and working to provide rich learning opportunities within those clinical experiences for candidates. So EPPs are continuing to work with mentor teachers to find out how they can best support the needs of teachers who are trying to manage this transition to remote learning and looking ahead to the fall. They're also using teaching cases as was highlighted in their regulations from California. And this includes tapping alumni who are already out in the field to help provide insights and experiences back to candidates about managing online and remote learning. Also includes the use of simulations and virtual classrooms to support candidate development as well. When it comes to re-envisioning ways teacher and leader candidates can contribute to PK-12 partner districts, one institution is allowing students to serve meals and support food access for families and communities, and then using those hours to count toward clinical practice requirements. Now we can go to the next slide. Preparation programs are reaching out to their PK-12 partners to better assess and understand their needs at this particular moment as well. A number of programs are working to provide supports more broadly to their partner schools and helping teacher candidates serve as a resource to mentor teachers and students. Institutions have worked to position student teachers as resources by connecting them with small groups of students or one-on-one opportunities to engage with either English language learners or students with specific disabilities, and allowing them to build on the knowledge and foundational work done through initial coursework in the program. This also includes having candidates videotape themselves to perform read-alouds as an additional resource to practicing teachers. You can go to the next slide. So the quote on this slide comes from an email that was recently sent to EdPrep or faculty at an EdPrep lab institution and illustrates how a candidate has worked to provide additional capacity and support to families and students. I just had a Zoom, I'm gonna read it really quickly. I just had a long Zoom meeting with a mother who's had a really hard time connecting with us because of time constraints and challenges with internet access. She only speaks Spanish, so I used my high school Spanish and Google Translate to communicate. At the end of the conversation, she was so happy that we were both almost in tears. It was her first time to really be in contact with anybody online because I had sent her a step-by-step picture of how to join a Zoom meeting, which she didn't know how to do. So as I'm writing this email, I'm feeling very proud and happy and feeling a little more ready for family interactions for the coming year. We can go to the next slide. And even beyond this tapping candidates as resources for their schools and communities, programs are specifically considering how to support the social and emotional needs of students and teacher candidates. This involves prioritizing social and emotional supports by redesigning coursework to help candidates learn how best to support students and families remotely and through online spaces. It's also about deepening cross-departmental collaboration by tapping expertise in school counseling departments, psychological services, mental health and wellness units, and helping faculty tap into that expertise to support candidates that then allows candidates to support families and students out in the field. We can go to the next slide. And finally, programs are using the current context to name and confront systemic injustices and equity issues highlighted by the COVID pandemic. One institution is working to ensure that the remote learning that they're demonstrating for candidates and modeling are reflective of culturally relevant and culturally sustaining and equitable practices that they are hoping candidates will then engage in their K-12 schools. Another institution reinforces the things that perhaps students are reading in some articles or book chapters, but now they're actually experiencing it and seeing it for themselves as they try to navigate this remote learning space. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of additional resources or information that might be helpful, we've included a resource slide here for any questions you might have or interests that go beyond what we've touched on. And we want to thank you all for the opportunity to share some of our recent work, and I will now turn it back over to Michelle.
Thank you so much to both of you. I would encourage folks to go ahead and tap or type their questions into the chat box right now. And I'm just going to wait just a second to see if we have any, and if not, we will just go ahead and get started with our next speaker. And then we'll save the remainder of the time at the end for Q&A. I know I have a number of questions myself. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started with Wyatt. Wyatt, you can go ahead and share your screen. Oh, wait, you do have one question. I'm going to pose this just real quick. Has there been an additional attention to GYO programs in light of COVID and racial justice issues?
Sure. I mean, I can take a crack at that. I mean, I think this moment in particular highlights the need for teachers and other school staff who are deeply connected and embedded in their communities. They're meeting needs across a range of areas, including school-based health, health and nutrition, emergency childcare for essential workers, and districts with those GYO programs in place are really able to lean on those staff with deep knowledge and understanding of the community that they're serving in. I think I see another question in the chat about how can we get and keep the resources that we need, not only for those high quality programs like GYO programs, but for everything else that's part of the teaching and learning process. And I know that is a major issue that states are grappling with right now. And I think, there is an active conversation happening in Washington. I think we will need some continued federal investment on that front to be able to address these issues in our states and districts as well. We have done some significant fiscal analyses, and I can put the links in the chat and let folks explore those as well. And my colleague Michael Griffith, who is a researcher and policy analyst at LPI, can speak more to that as well. He's on slide.
That would be really helpful, Tara. I know that a lot of this concerns coming from and legislative staff both are the budget cuts and the impact that it will have on our effort to recruit and retain teachers.
And Michelle, you've been so gracious to invite Michael to speak on Friday, so hopefully we'll be able to dig into these issues in more depth on Friday as well.
Yes, we will. And I just want to also reference some of the other concerns that were brought up to another, again, from Representative Pruso in Hawaii, who also talked about how to continue to end the teacher shortage when we already felt like we were in crisis, and now we have this real lack of revenue, particularly in Hawaii, around the revenue from tourism. They're feeling that very deeply, and I think it goes back to those exact same concerns. And then we also had a question about teacher residencies and how to continue to support teacher residencies right now as an opportunity to ensure that our teachers are well prepared. And do either one of you want to speak to teacher residencies at all? And the impact they may have right now.
Sure.
That may be impacted right now in this time.
Yeah. So teacher residencies are a model of teacher preparation that is a tightly linked partnership between a school district and institution of higher education to support teacher training with a full year of apprenticeship alongside an expert teacher to get that deep clinical training that we know results in increased retention rates, as well as brings in a more diverse cadre, typically, of new teachers into the field in ways that really meet the needs of the school district in terms of shortage areas and hiring. Teacher residency programs, I think, have been some of the most successful in getting candidates in this moment to continue to be able to, they're so already deeply integrated in their school settings that it was a natural shift to have teacher residents, continuing their clinical practice. In one example, the resident teacher is running classroom breakfast meetings for students and just providing an additional moment of during the day for students to connect with their peers and build their kind of social and emotional skills and just relationships with their peers and their teachers, and providing support to the mentor teacher in the classroom who was planning another class meeting at a different point in the day. So it's enabling students to get more touch points with adults as well. Many states have made investments in teacher residency programs over the past few years in response to their teacher shortages, and I think we're seeing those threatened right now in face of budget cuts. So I think it's an important thing that we are watching And I know in my own home state of California, the significant investments that were made there, some are already underway and will continue, but others that there had been planned increases, and those are no longer going to happen. So.
This might be a good moment for me to mention that I am actually finalizing a publication on this topic. It will be a legislator's guide for the topic of teacher residencies, information on what they are, what the research says about them, what they look like, and what are the state policies. So you can look for that later this summer. Okay, well, at this time, I'm going to invite Wyatt to join us. Wyatt Gordon is from ETS, and he is going to share information on the work that they're doing at ETS to support teacher preparation right now.
Excellent. Okay, so I am Wyatt Gordon. I'm the Executive Director of Professional Educator Programs at ETS, and I'm going to talk a bit about our Praxis Tests at Home solution. So in the Professional Educator Program division, we have responsibility for the Praxis assessments. We also deliver a suite of custom assessments for the state of Georgia called GACE. And we have a couple of performance assessments for teachers, the PPAT and the PASL assessment, which are very similar to EdTPA and have many of the same concerns right now as Tara outlined in her presentation. So at ETS, our professional educator programs are primarily concerned with providing solutions that enable educators to continue their journeys into the classroom and for states to ensure teacher quality. In mid-March, when the closure of in-person businesses around the country impacted the ability of many test takers to complete their licensure assessments in testing centers, we worked around the clock to find a solution to the problem. So we wanted to provide states with the opportunity to maintain their teacher certification systems in order to ensure that all students are being served by qualified teachers. And we know at ETS that it's our responsibility to help educators and to go above and beyond in times of crisis, and it's part of our mission as a not-for-profit company. So we put our heads together, and over a period of about 2 months, working quite a bit on the solution, we came up with the Praxis Tests at Home. It's a convenient, flexible, and safe option for test takers while test centers are impacted by COVID. We understand that all K-12 schools, colleges, and university campuses are impacted, and we hope by providing the Praxis Tests at Home, we are providing access to the test remotely and will help minimize disruptions while helping educators to receive their certification for entry into classrooms. So what is the Praxis Tests at Home? They're the same research-based, valid, and reliable Praxis test, just delivered at home while our test centers are impacted due to the coronavirus. And a little background on the Praxis tests are, they are licensure assessments designed to measure the academic skills and subject-specific content knowledge necessary for teaching. They're taken by individuals entering the teaching profession. They're also taken by teacher candidates and emerging school leaders as part of the certification process required by many states and professional organizations. The Praxis tests are used in over 40 states around the country. In fact, we have over 100 different Praxis content and pedagogy assessments that allows every state to customize their licensure and certification program while maintaining reciprocity and comparability with other states. So the Praxis tests at home are identical in content, format, and on-screen experience to those taken in our physical test centers. They use the same scoring criteria, the same scoring process, and the same score scale, so all our scores can be accepted and used in the same way by our state clients. We offer these tests at the same price to test takers as we do our traditional tests that are offered in testing centers, and they have the same features such as the ability to skip questions and use on-screen calculators as our traditional tests do. So what's different? The only thing that's different about the Praxis tests at home is the test delivery method. All the testing takes place in a test taker's personal desktop or their laptop computer at home, and we don't support tablets or mobile phone devices. The test sessions are monitored in real time through the use of human proctors and also artificial intelligence technology. And of course, the entire test session is video recorded, and we review many of the test sessions, and we review every single log that comes ETS of a completed session. So the Praxis tests at home were launched on May 15th, 2020 for registration, and May 18th, 2020 for the first test deliveries in every single US state and territory. Our testing sessions are currently available from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time, 7 days a week, including holidays. And as of today, we're very proud of this. Almost 50,000 test appointments have been scheduled, and almost 10,000 test takers have completed assessments. And importantly for us, that means that there are 10,000 teachers that are able to get into the classroom this fall. We're very excited and proud about that. So there are certain eligibility requirements. Test takers must register to take the test at home in the US or its territories. They also must have computer equipment that must meet the requirements for the test. We instruct test takers to set up their computers and prove that their hardware is compatible prior to their registration. In addition, they have to have test rooms that meet the requirements for an acceptable testing environment. And I'll talk about that in a second. So what are the equipment requirements? We require a desktop or laptop computer, as I mentioned, not a tablet or mobile device. We support both Mac and Windows-based machines, and test takers need to use Chrome or Firefox. There's also a couple requirements for the microphone, speaker, and camera as well. In terms of the test environment, test takers have to be alone in a room with no one else entering during the test session. They're not allowed to test in a public place like a park, internet cafe, or restaurant. You can see how that might cause some problems. And the computer and keyboard must be used on a desk or another tabletop surface. The surrounding area must be cleared of all items that are not approved for testing during the test. And they must sit in a regular chair. They can't lie down on the bed or a couch. And of course, food and drink are not permitted during testing. Test takers may not take notes on regular sheets of paper for security purposes, but they can use a whiteboard with erasable marker. And we also offer the option of using a blank paper inside a transparent sheet protector with an erasable marker. All notes taken during the tests are erased in view of the proctor at the end of the test. So let's talk about security. So ETS is taking every precaution to ensure that test delivery and administration meet our high standards. We employ multiple best-in-class security measures that use both real-time human monitoring and also artificial intelligence technology. So we have live proctors that proctor every single at-home test. They have they ensure that the test taker is who they say they are, and they also scan the home environment before testing begins. They flag suspicious activity and intervene if necessary in the testing session. The artificial intelligence technology employed is facial recognition technology, but also gaze tracking and video recording of the entire session. And we use these measures to guard against malicious activity and to alert the proctor of any suspicious activity that's happening during the test session. So how does our real-time human proctoring work? We've partnered with ProctorU. They have 10 plus years of experience in delivering innovative solutions to over 1,000 organizations, many of them in education, including universities and colleges and school districts. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from somebody on the line. And their data from over 5 million test takers includes large-scale and high-stakes tests. So they have unique insight into how examinees attempt to game the system and violate security standards. ProctorU trains and employs all the proctors in identifying attempts to gain an unfair advantage. And again, the proctors are coupled with artificial intelligence for added security. So one of the measures that we employ is that before testing begins, proctors take a photo of the test taker and their ID documents. And the proctor verifies that the ID documents are current, valid, and acceptable. And then they use the facial recognition technology to compare the ID document with the person sitting at the computer. And that artificial intelligence is also used throughout the test examination experience to make sure that the test taker's face continues to match the identification that they provided to us. And we check the home environment through our proctors by ensuring that test takers show a 360-degree view of the room, including the tabletop surface before testing begins. If test takers leave the room for a break to use the restroom or for some other reason, then when they return, they have to go through the check-in process again, show the room, and verify that the test is secure. So how are we guarding against cheating? Human proctoring takes place in real time. It doesn't take place after the test. and wrongdoing can be detected by a proctor during the test. This real-time human vigilance is combined with artificial intelligence technology to detect attempts to steal test content or to cheat. So some examples of that are test takers opening a new browser while they're taking the test, running unpermitted software, or using unpermitted objects like a cell phone. And the proctor can cancel a test immediately if there's any attempt to cheat by test takers in those ways. So how else is ETS supporting test takers during this time? Currently, we're waiving our reschedule fees, not only for test takers who were impacted by COVID, but also those who express concern about going to a test center. I think it's important to note that we've launched the at-home solution while our test centers have reopened. So currently, students are able to go into a physical test center, or if they choose to take their test via the at-home solution. We're also offering a 30% discount on our interactive practice tests and have extended our subscription to 180 days and 15 uses. Of course, we are communicating frequently with our test takers and clients on the ETS website and personally as well. If anyone needs any more information about our Praxis Test at Home solution or has any questions about ETS, you can feel free to email me at egordon001@ets.org. Or of course, you can visit our website. We have a ton of content there for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting view into how we are converting these online assessment or these assessments that both college and high school students are taking in preparation for college or a completion for licensure, and how you all are adapting to that new world. I know there's been so many questions about security, and I think this is the most in-depth look that we've had at all the different security measures that you would take. So I personally found it really interesting. We had another discussion earlier in our series about the transition for the SAT exams and the PSAT exams. And, you know, they're pretty quiet about what the security might be in advance of those exams being administered. And so this is interesting to me to see that I'm sure they're probably taking a lot of the similar precautions into how this is happening at home and how you keep that secure.
Yep.
Okay, so please be sure to type your questions in the chat box. I see that Mike Griffith has included a link there to the information that he's been putting together, the phenomenal research on the impact that the pandemic will have on teaching positions. And Mike just showed himself and waved. Thank you, Mike. And as Tara said, he'll be joining us again on Friday to discuss this in a little bit more detail. Okay, so what additional questions do you have for our speakers today? I'm going to give you a moment to either unmute yourself or type your questions in the chat box. If you have another question, you can just feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like. If not, I have several I'd like to ask. Okay, while you are doing that and thinking about that, I'm going to ask a few questions myself. So I have a question about the extent to which the states had to quickly adapt their licensure process. Part of it is the exam, but you know, there's background checks, there's all the other things that have to happen. And as students are graduating and getting ready to go through this process to get into the classroom, I'm wondering if you all have tracked at all how states have adapted that licensure process for teachers so that we can make sure that they're ready to be hired for the fall. I know just the hiring schedule has been completely thrown off, and that was a big concern for a lot of school districts. Could you all answer that if you have some insight into that?
You know, Michelle, I don't know that I have a great answer on the background check question in particular. I haven't looked closely at those requirements across states, but you know, everything from CPR testing requirements, for example, which were suspended in some states because you can't do it. You can't do those certifications in person anymore right now. I mean, every state is different, and I think states have taken a really thoughtful approach to removing those barriers to obtaining licenses where, you know, it was simply impossible to meet them in the current context, or thinking of postponing, giving candidates more time to complete those requirements, and either giving them some kind of a temporary license while they do so, or allowing them, we just got an executive order that came out last week in our state, allowing candidates, for example, to have, they don't have to complete their teacher performance assessment to earn their initial credential, their preliminary credential in the state, but they can complete it during the induction process before they complete their clear credential. On the initial basic skills exam requirements, for example, instead of needing to take that to enter a program, now you have to take it to complete your program and be recommended for your license. So states are, I think, coming up with the solutions that work and that enable candidates to be serving in classrooms next fall who have completed most of the requirements for their training. There was a question in the chat, I don't know if I can speak to it now, from Representative Santos about the impact of EdTPA on the teacher shortage, and then expressing her concerns there, including around the diversity of the teaching profession. And I will just say that states, I think, are looking at the impact of all kinds of assessments, not just teacher performance assessments, as the EdTPA is, on teachers' ability to come into the profession, and the disparate impacts that many assessments have on certain subgroups of teachers. I will say that the research generally on performance assessments shows a much less disparate impact for different racial groups and ethnic groups of teachers than other types of standardized assessments. Early research on, for example, the performance assessment of California teachers showed no disparate impact, for example, of those performance assessments. So I'm happy to follow up with more research that we've seen in the field there on that particular question.
Yeah, so I'll just piggyback on that and say that we've been working really closely with our state clients around the country to make sure that we keep in constant contact and keep them abreast of the different developments that are occurring here at ETS. We don't have responsibility for EdTPA. That's a competitor's assessment, but we do have similar assessments in the performance area. I think, the concern about disparate impact or performance gaps is certainly a concern. ETS has been coupling with states across the country to make sure that we're ensuring teacher quality and providing the supports necessary for students to take and pass their certification exams to ensure that they're able to make gains in the classroom and have no disparate impact on the students that they teach. So.
That's very helpful. Thank you for answering that question. I had a question about the concern generally of the loss of the number of students who may be entering just universities in general, and how you see that maybe impacting teacher preparation this year. We know a lot of students may be considering a gap year or just taking this year off, knowing the situation that they're heading into with the possibility of remote learning. I actually just talked to a student whose university is open, but all of her professors are saying, you can come here, but we're offering all of our courses online. So the university is open, but all the courses will still be online. So how do we think this may impact the recruitment effort for teachers when we already know that there are many fewer teachers going into the profession already?
Yeah. That's a good question, and I might defer to Tara, but first I'll just say that, we talk to a lot of EPPs regularly and keep in contact with them as well, and they're all very concerned about recruitment numbers for their entering class next year, and for some it's an existential issue, right? I mean, financially there are going to be preparation programs that aren't able to survive because they don't have an incoming class. So I think, EPPs are turning their attention to that. I'm not sure that there has been a concerted effort to really think about what might be done in order to fix the issue, but it's absolutely a concern, particularly if there are, there's an exodus in the teaching profession for folks that are currently in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know that I have a ton to add. We've seen dramatically declining enrollment in educator preparation programs, since the Great Recession, really, and even going back further than that. We're starting to see some small upticks as states really put in place measures to increase enrollment, to recruit more candidates into the profession and to provide supports there. I do worry that we're going to see a lot of backsliding on that front. And, the numbers aren't out yet, but anecdotally, enrollment is going to be down, and then that will carry ripple effects for years to come, right? I think it's going to be big, and it's just hard to tell exactly the level of that impact yet.
Yeah, I would think it would be particularly impactful for those areas that already had a hard time recruiting new teachers to those hard to staff positions, or, in rural areas, or for particularly in areas of teaching where we know we have shortages. So I can only imagine the worry that's out there about the impact of just kids not going to college generally, let alone the maybe disproportionate impact. I also think that, there's a lot of concern generally about education and the challenges that we're going to face going forward, and the impact this has had on kids and their learning. And I know we're going to talk a whole lot more about this on Friday, but how this is impacting teachers themselves. And, it's very daunting to think about the year ahead and what they might be facing with their students, and to try to recruit new students to go into teaching and to go into college and face that might be even more challenging. Fingers crossed it's not. Okay, well, I'm going to leave time for one more question. And as I'm waiting, I'm going to share my screen where we will preview the meetings that we have coming up. Okay, seeing no more questions, I'm going to just remind you that on Friday, we will continue the discussion about teaching, and we're going to talk about the impact that the pandemic is having on the current teaching workforce. We know this has come up a lot in our previous discussions, particularly around mental health, social emotional learning, the ACEs, and the impact of this could potentially have even on the teachers. We also have talked about learning loss and the ground that the teachers are going to have to make, all the while they're teaching in an environment that they weren't necessarily trained to be teaching in. So looking forward to that discussion, and we will also continue to discuss more about the impact that the revenue shortfall could potentially have on the loss of teaching positions. So please join us on Friday for that discussion. After this week, we will have 2 more weeks of virtual meetings. We will be focusing on guidance for reopening schools, early learning. We're going to have an update on state revenue forecasts. And then we're going to close out the series with a really interesting discussion on evidence-based policymaking with our director of our news center at NCSL, who will be talking about how it is that you be a good consumer of all the research and information that's out there, and how that can impact the decisions that you're having to make right now in this very moment. And I would also mention, just a reminder, that all of the information about these virtual meetings is on NCSL's website. And especially for those who weren't able to join us, we know right now there are a good number of states that are back in session, making those difficult decisions right now. So I've had lots of questions about how they can access the resources or watch the videos, even if they weren't able to join us in person. So please share that information with your colleagues. And please feel free to reference that material if you need to go back and remind yourself about some of this information. So we will look forward to seeing you again on Friday. And just one last thank you to our speakers. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. Have a good rest of the day, everyone, and we will see you back here on Friday.